Welcome to Curious Life of a Child-Free Woman, a podcast celebrating unconventional choices and asking curious questions through the lens of a happy, child-free life. Every week, I chat with experts on today's most interesting topics, inspiring us to think differently, live intentionally, and find fulfillment on our terms. Whether you're child-free or seeking a space where parenthood isn't part of the conversation, you are welcome here. It's not about comparison, it's about possibility. Let's get curious together. There is an unspoken default in our culture that unwinding or celebrating usually comes with a cocktail. But I feel like our relationship with alcohol has really been in flux since the pandemic. There's been a lot of news in 2025 related to health impacts. We keep hearing that younger generations are drinking less, and we've been seeing a lot of new products coming onto the market designed to help us relax and connect. That leads to one of the hottest topics in our current culture: cannabis. Today's guest, Lisa Hurwitz, is the president of Happi, a cannabis-infused low-dose seltzer designed for people who want a new kind of ritual, one that feels light, natural, and grounded in intention. Before launching Happi, Lisa spent years at the highest levels of the corporate world, leading global marketing at brands like Kimberly-Clark and Grassroots Cannabis. But it's her personal curiosity about wellness, balance, and rewriting the rules of how we relax that makes this conversation so timely and so interesting to me. Welcome, Lisa.
Emily, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here and looking forward to sharing my journey I talk about from toilet paper to rolling papers. That used to actually be my headline on LinkedIn. Coming from more of a corporate CPG background into cannabis was like record scratch moment, mic drop moment for me in my career. So I'm looking forward to chatting with you about it today.
Let's start there, because when we met, I was as intrigued as I'm sure everyone else was when they read that headline about your story and kind of this shift in not just industries, going from the corporate structure to a founder in the cannabis space, but also where you live. You moved your family to a really interesting destination. So can you start by just kind of telling us how you got to where you are today as the president of
Yeah,
Happi?
absolutely. So I sort of jokingly call it like my early midlife crisis, roughly when I turned 40. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I was, like a lot of women, I think I was very driven, right? Like succeed, perform, climb the corporate ladder. Out of school, I'm a marketer by background. I went straight into brand marketing, spent the early part of my career in the agency world, then with Procter and Gamble as my main client, and then Kimberly Clark. So classic CPG, kind of had these aspirations to become a CMO. And in 2017, right when California was kind of legalizing weed, I actually started to just burn out from having a global corporate career. I was working 80 hours a week. I was on a plane all the time, and I was burnt out. I was taking Ambien to sleep. I couldn't get off of it. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't function. And one day, a friend of mine who had recently been in California came over to our house. And at night, he said, "Hey, do you want a puff of this vape pen?" And I was like, "No, I'm a good girl. I don't smoke. Don't want to try this." Next thing I knew, I took a puff and I slept through the night without Ambien. And the next night, I was like, "Wait a minute, can we do that again? Like, was that a fluke? Can we do this again?" Took a puff, and it honestly, it changed my life. I was living in Chicago at the time. I got a medical card for what was a medical cannabis program. So before a lot of the dispensaries, a lot of your listeners may see now, a lot of these were medical only, and you actually had to have a medical card. But I even thought, Emily, that that meant a prescription or I would see a doctor, because I was so used to sort of Western medicine. And it's like, if I have a medical card, I'm going to go into a dispensary. That wasn't the case whatsoever. So I essentially spent a year while I was still at Kimberly Clark teaching myself cannabis. Like, okay, I'm going to go into these dispensaries. It was all typically a lot of young men, and they were bud tenders. That's what they're called in the dispensaries, not bartenders, but bud tenders. And I said, "What do I take to sleep?" Because that was my main kind of entry point into cannabis. And the first time I took something that one of the bud tenders recommended, I couldn't get up for 2 days. I missed work. It was a disaster. So I said, "Wait a minute, there's got to be a better way, because this is clearly helping me sleep, but it's not in a format that me as a woman, lower dose consumer feels good about." So next thing I know, 2018, I actually left the big CPG world, left Kimberly Clark, and went to become the chief marketing officer of Grassroots Cannabis, which was a multi-state operator. So we owned dispensaries and grow facilities in 12 states. And during that time, I had just learned a lot more about the plant, about how it's grown, how it can be put into different types of products. And when I left Grassroots in 2020, right during the pandemic, we had sold the company. I did a transition. I said, my passion is really lower dose cannabis for women like me. And that's why I'm super excited to talk to you and your audience today, because there's such an opportunity for cannabis to replace a lot of things. We talk about alcohol quite a bit, and I can get into that because Happi, my company now, is a beverage. But for me, actually, the replacement was pills. It was Ambien. And I think there's a lot of people on, especially right now with the stress in the world, on antidepressants, on anti-anxiety medication. And for those that are looking to sort of help supplement that, right? There's a lot of ways in which cannabis can help with relaxation, can help with sleep, can help with pain relief, in addition to just being something that helps you have fun. So that's really the sort of founder story behind Happi, and where my sense of purpose and my, record scratch moment in my career, that's the backstory behind it.
Thank you for sharing that. You touched on so many things that I really want to dig into. And let's start with this topic of wellness and public perception, because that feeling that you had when your friend was like, oh, take a puff of this, and you were like, whoa, absolutely not, right? You use the phrase good girl. I think a lot of us can relate to that. Like there's this thing in our mind that wine night or having a cocktail on a date, that's no problem. That's what we're all doing. Like that's normal social behavior. But smoking a joint, using a vape, like taking an edible, like, whoa, now we're into drug
Right.
territory. And it's, there's this stigma around it, I think, in general, but even especially for women. So tell me more, like at this phase in 2025, how do you perceive the stigma that's still out there in the culture?
There absolutely still is a stigma. I would say it's coming down. And with the introduction of beverages like Happi and sort of this hemp derived cannabis category, which has allowed these products to come outside of the dispensaries and in more mainstream, even some grocery stores are starting to carry them. That has taken the stigma away to a degree, but we all grew up. I mean, I'll date myself. I'm in my mid 40s with the Just Say No Nancy Reagan campaign. Like, you remember the egg frying, this is your brain. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions? Like, I'm a marketer. Like, that marketing campaign was really effective, right? It was very effective in getting people to be scared of drugs. And I think what's breaking down the stigma is the idea that, wait a minute, alcohol is also not necessarily good for me. Some of these pharmaceuticals, just because I can get a prescription, it doesn't mean they're good for me. And I think consumers are becoming much smarter, especially with this big health and wellness boom we've seen over the past like 5 to 10 years. They're doing their own research. They're becoming smarter, and they're realizing that a lot of what was in the past. I mean, I don't know if you've had guests come on recently to talk about menopause or hormone replacement therapy. There's a lot in the
Yes.
world of women's health that in the 80s and 90s was just a big misnomer, right? Like, HRT is horrible for you. You can't, I'm in a woman who's straight in the middle of perimenopause, and I feel like this is the same in multiple parts of my life. Cannabis is one piece of it, but there was a stigma against hormone replacement therapy. And I feel very similarly about the cannabis space. There's a stigma about, if this is healthier for me than alcohol, why did it get such a bad reputation or a bad rap? And like, consumers taking it into their own hands. So we're seeing more and more. Emily actually surveyed our direct to consumer database, which is about 90,000 consumers, of which 80% are women. And we said, how much does the stigma still play? And about 70% said it's definitely changing. It's coming down. I'm feeling more comfortable. And I attribute that to both more people trying it and realizing, wait a minute, like, this is fine, and more low dose, safe, good products on the market that aren't going to be that proverbial gummy or cookie where you don't get off the couch for 3 days, right? Like, consumers aren't having those negative experiences with cannabis because the quality and, to a degree, the control that they have over their experience has gotten a lot better, if that makes sense.
Market shifts like this are always so interesting to me, one as a consumer, but I work in the brand space. I know you come from the brand and marketing space. And it seems like it is always this kind of combination or back and forth seesaw between real data and understanding and just customer interest. And the more consumers are interested in something, the more study and research that's done, the more research that comes out, the more customers are interested in something and the more likely they are to try. And yeah, I think the dosage is a huge thing. that experience you described, which wasn't intentional, where you're stuck in bed, that's the nightmare for most women, right? Like, how am I going to get my work done? I mean, we can't stand to be derailed with a cold, let alone be like, oh my gosh, I inflicted this on myself. So that makes sense to me. Like, the more knowledge we have in the space, then things are being created like Happi that have a great result and a great impact. And then people are like, okay, wait, my friend recommended this. Now I'll try it again. I love to hear that such a large base of your consumers are women, because I do think women are seeking something. We don't want to be hungover. We don't always want the calories of alcohol. We're seeking something to kind of scratch that itch of relaxation or celebration. And we haven't really known what to do for that other than having a drink. So it's an exciting time to have options like this.
100%. And it's fascinating to me because I don't think most women believe alcohol is good for your health. I don't think most people believe alcohol is good for your health. But now all of the research coming out just in January with the Surgeon General saying it causes cancer. There's umpteen articles coming out saying alcohol is actually much worse for women than it is for men. But to your point, Emily, women still drink. And by the way, I do too. Every once in a while, I have a glass of wine. There's no shame in it. But I do think women who want to feel like to take the edge off, that little buzz, that like, hey, I just want to kind of relax and I want to feel like good for a couple hours, but I don't want, to your point, the calories and the high sugar. And we designed Happi intentionally, all natural. Every one of our flavors is under 50 calories. So even if you were to have two, you're still under 100 calories, all natural ingredients, no refined sugar, vegan. And we did that intentionally because I wanted to make a drink I want to drink. And I want to drink several of them over the course of a night, right? And so I think what's really interesting is alcohol is just so ingrained as a social experience, right? I go out to dinner, I'm having, a glass of wine with a bunch of girlfriends. That's why the format that cannabis comes in is really important. And that's why this breakthrough on the beverage side, I think, is so interesting, because it's not the same to go to a party. And I used to do this a lot. You go and you just take a bite of an edible before you go to an event or whatever, because you don't want to drink. I remember thinking that and doing that, but that's a terrible consumer experience. Like, everyone else has got something in their hand and I'm just like waiting for this edible to hit me, So that's not the kind of buzz or experience I think most people would want. Instead, what Happi allows, and how we've designed the product, is a quicker onset to mimic alcohol. So it's like 10 to 15 minutes. And it's a can. It's a liquid. You can drink it out of a glass. You can drink it out of a can. You could go to a party with it. You could sit at a dinner table, and you don't feel left out of the ritual, left out of the social experience, right? And I think that's the trick with cannabis, is before it was coming in these formats, gummies, pills, vapes, flour that you can roll joints and smoke, right? And that's not most kind of women in my demographic and your like, I don't know that that's the experience they want. Put it in a can, 5 milligrams perfectly dosed, that tastes delicious and is under 50 calories. Oh yeah, I'll drink that all day long. And we've seen huge growth, particularly in our direct to consumer business, because they also like the convenience of having it delivered to their home. Our subscriptions, 64% of our sales are coming through subscriptions now, which is really high. That's come up quite a bit from 2024. And it's awesome. It's because I'm the consumer, right? That's what I want. I want easy, because I'm a busy woman with a lot going on. I want easy, delivered to my door, delicious, low calorie, and just takes the edge off.
I love when you use the phrase ritual, and I've seen that in your marketing as well, because what you just described there is so true. And I've been thinking a lot this year about our relationship with alcohol as a society. And, to your point, it's in the news all the time now, and there's all these different studies coming out. I think a lot of people are getting really scared, but it is so widespread. Like, grabbing a drink is a whole category of activity that we do with people in business and personal life and dating, like it with family. Like, it's such a thing. And I think there's kind of two pieces of it in my mind. I mean, of course, it's a nuanced thing, but there's the celebration use case where we want to have fun. We want to be with people. We want to be social, and we want something that feels like we're just shifting our mindset into that presence a little bit. So everything you just walked through, having it as a beverage, something you can have more than one of, you're participating while others are having a cocktail or whatever. It feels like this isn't weird or different. This is just my brand of socializing that feels right to me. And that's amazing because I think like that's the fun side of why we all continue to reach for something. Then there's this other side of
Mm.
unwinding or relaxing, decompressing. And I still think that happens with people. We do that in groups. And which again, this is like such a judgment-free space. I love a cocktail and I still do. But, that like nightly thing, right? With like to take the edge off, as you just said. And I was doing some research before our conversation about stress, and I found these studies. I'm just going to read through a couple because I think we all need to know this. This is like current data.
And
So,
stressors,
like,
that's my jam. Just,
yeah.
yes, I totally get it. But I would love to hear it. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. It's another thing that we know is bad for us. Like there's so much data. This is bad for our health. It's bad for our lifespan. It's bad for our weight, all of these things. And yet we're in these environments all the time where we feel stressed. So, okay, some of these stats. There was a study by Mental Health America that reported 75% of Americans experienced a physical or mental health symptom related to stress in 2024.
Mhm.
So 75% of Americans in this study said that they had a health symptom related to stress last year. There was a study by the American Psychological Association that found that almost 80% of American adults consider the country's future a significant source of stress in 2025. That's a big increase from previous years, 80%. And then women are more stressed than men, not by a huge amount, but by some amount in every study that I saw. And women are reporting stress in more categories than men
Mhm.
related to money, family, responsibility, relationships, career. We're stressed about everything.
Mhm.
So, like, that is very real. We see the impacts. I think most of us feel it. It's exactly why you burnt out, right? And decided to go in a different direction with your life. Tell me more. Like there's the THC, there's CBD, but I know there are a lot of other ingredients in Happy. Like for this occasion, when somebody is like, yes, we could get really philosophical about how to restructure society to eliminate stress. But between now and then, like tonight, this weekend, what is it about Happy that can make us feel better or help us relax a bit?
I love this because Happy actually, the first two beverages that I was the most proud of in what we designed about 3 years ago, and we actually have provisional patents on both. One is Happy Nightcap, which was sleep. So, not surprisingly, because the way I got into cannabis was, and by the way, Emily, the reason I don't sleep is because of stress. So, these two things are very linked, right? And most people,
Right.
if you cite why do they not sleep, they say it's because of stress, right? So, stress is really linked to sleep as well. And then the other was sort of this golden hour moment. So I identified in my own life that the transition between getting done with work and having dinner or my evening plans was always stressful because you still have your head in your work day and then you're trying to figure it out. And what could I have? Because that's when most people drink a drink or a glass of wine during the week, is that kind of golden hour. Like, okay, now it's my treat, right? I worked really hard this week or I worked really hard today. And that is actually the number one occasion we're seeing people replace wine in particular with Happy, is that kind of golden hour. It's the weekday wine occasion. Because a lot of times people don't want to give up their drinks on the weekend or they're going out and they don't want to bring something with them if they're going out to a bar. They don't want to seem like they're the weird one at the table who's doing something different. So it's an obvious need people have, is to say, I want to cut back on alcohol, or it's a random Tuesday night, but I had a huge presentation today and I deserve a glass of wine. And that's where we're seeing Happy play a big role. And we have a product, and it's been our number one bestseller, and I'm not surprised, called Happy Glow. And it's designed intentionally for relaxation. And when we survey our consumers, which we do several times a year, the number one reason they drink Happy is relaxation. And it's our Glow blood orange ginger flavor, which we formulated intentionally for a relaxing effect. And we have it in a 5 milligram and a 10 milligram. And it's got CBD, CBG, CBN, which are all minor cannabinoids that play different roles than THC. So THC is the psychoactive. That if you think a lot of people are familiar with CBD, there is some CBD in it, but there's also CBG and CBN. CBN is for relaxation and sleep more so. We have even more of it in our nighttime product. And CBG is a little bit of kind of like just a mood boost, just like sort of elevate to the mood a little bit. There's still a lot of research happening, but we knew that combination of minor cannabinoids, along with some lion's mane mushroom and THC, would offer a glow, would offer this relaxing end of day, and the flavor's delicious. So it's been our best seller. But I will tell you, just on the flip side, we started to have a lot of requests for mood boost, which is sort of the other side, not like I'm going to go have a party, right? But just like I'm in a bad mood, which is often also caused by stress. Like, oh, I had a rough day.
Yes.
Just, I'm in the worst mood. And so we formulated Happy Dance, and we talk about it can be like dance while nobody's watching. It's your own sort of moment. And I know you and I were talking about drinking one earlier. I think you have one with you, but Happy Dance was,
Yeah, let me show.
oh yeah. And it's got the little headphone.
For anybody, yes, for anybody who is watching this on YouTube, and if you're not, go look at this part on YouTube because the cans are so freaking cute. And this one in particular, the headphones being called Dance, it's just, I mean, the branding is spot on.
Thank you. I was like, everyone was like, what are we going to call this product? I'm like, we're going to call it Happy Dance because that's what we want people to do when they drink it, right? Feel better. And so that one's formulated with a little ginseng for a little kick and THCV, which again is another, it's not talked about as much, but that's the beauty of the plant, is that there's all these different cannabinoids and parts of the plant different from alcohol. So it's not as if, when you're deriving vodka, you can get different effects, right? Vodka's sort of vodka. Same thing with most alcohol. And that's where this excitement around the cannabis category comes in, because you can actually formulate beverages to have different effects. And our number one effect and number one need state for our consumers, relaxation. And so Glow has been our bestseller, and Happy Dance is just on fire right now. I think part of it is people love the flavor, but there's a lot of stress, to your point, in the system right now, and they just want to be in a better mood. And if I can drink this and feel good and several hours later have no hangover, not more than 30 extra calories, it's a wonderful solution to that.
Tell me more about how this actually works. The different parts of the plants you named there, I had never heard of any of that. I think, yeah, CBD and THC are out there in the culture now, but I didn't even know there was so much nuance to how you can impact certain effects or put these ingredients together. When somebody drinks a can of Happy, and maybe this answer is different for the different types, the different ingredients, what is actually happening in our body or in our brain?
Yeah, so we have an endocannabinoid system, and overall cannabis and cannabinoids like match up, right? So everybody's endocannabinoid system is different. And people like to think, well, if I react this way to alcohol, am I going to react this way to cannabis? No. I mean, I can tell you right now that my husband is 6'2", over 200 pounds. I'm not. I'm 5'5", well under 200 pounds. And I have a higher THC or higher cannabis tolerance because of the way my endocannabinoid system is genetically. And I was actually just talking to someone else about this yesterday. So there's also a misnomer that, and by the way, with drinks versus other types of formats in cannabis, one of the things with drinks is it starts to get metabolized in your mouth first. The saliva starts to break it down, and then it goes into your stomach, which is why the onset in beverages is faster typically than gummies. Because in gummies, if you think about it, there's not much to have in your mouth. It's like a one and done. It goes straight almost into your stomach. So it takes a little bit longer to be metabolized. Drinks get metabolized faster. But one of the big misconceptions in this category is that you're automatically going to need to go up, like you're going to build a tolerance. And that's not necessarily what the data says, right? That's what the category wants, because they're like, well, we have ranges. We can have a 2.5 milligram all the way up to, you can go to some Total Wines and you're going to find a 50 milligram can. Like that 50 milligram can, by the way, is not designed for the normal consumer, right? That's not most people. And most people will never build a tolerance. You kind of are genetically inclined based on your endocannabinoid system to, metabolize cannabis and the effects in a certain way. There's a lot of the minor cannabinoids, which I talked about, which are sort of up and coming. That's a lot of where cannabis science is. And one of the unfortunate things is, the federal government has never really funded any sort of research into this. So it's, there's private companies doing it and private institutions, but there's a lot of different, I'm not going to get the number right because I can't remember, parts of the plant that have different effects. So some of it is, with CBN, for example, which is widely used with THC to help enhance sleep. A lot of those studies, come from the regulated cannabis market, where more and more of these larger cannabis companies are getting more sophisticated with the types of products they're putting out. And so through that, they're doing research and looking at these different parts of the plant. But it's plant science. It's very fascinating. And I think with more research and more funding, the other piece to this too, Emily, especially in the beverage space, is the big alcohol players see cannabis as the next phase of growth for them. And that is clear because alcohol is declining. And it has been for a while. Almost all categories now, besides I think tequila, are declining. Spirits, beer, wine. People are just buying less because they realize it's not healthy for them. And cannabis is sort of in the opposite trajectory. It's going up. And so I think the big alcohol companies are all looking at this category, having regular conversations about it. And when they get into it, that's when we're going to see the real innovation around these different, plant cannabinoids and plant science.
This is so fascinating. In some ways, I feel like there's been so much growth and expansion in this category. I live in Illinois where cannabis is legalized. So, there's like the branding of dispensaries and, there's kind of whole cultural things that are happening in all the different neighborhoods in the city. So I feel like, oh my gosh, like cannabis is everywhere, weed is everywhere, but it's still very early in the industry. And that's really interesting what you said about alcohol companies trying to shift into this. So yeah, I wanted to kind of ask you, since we have you here as a industry insider in this space, like what is going on in the industry right now? Like what is the state of things? Like, do you feel like it's still kind of in an incubator, or is the competition really coming up? Like, just what's the state of the industry?
So it's super fascinating. I've worked in the industry and I worked in the dispensary side and the grow side in Chicago. So I know that world incredibly well. And it has changed dramatically in the past 2 years. So I can explain, I won't go into the regulatory nuance because it'll bore everybody. But essentially, there's sort of two sides of the industry right now. If you are in a state like Illinois or Michigan or California or now even New York, I mean, there's tons. I think there's almost 30 states that have dispensaries. And that's where the regulated cannabis market is. So to sell in a dispensary, you have to grow the weed in the state. You have to process it, meaning if you make it into a gummy or you make it into a pill or whatever you make it into a vape, like oil for a vape pen, it has to be processed and then it has to be sold in the state. So there is no interstate commerce. It's all what we call vertical within the state: grow, process, sell. That's how that market has grown up. And it's accelerated since about 2017, 2018, California being the first. And then many, many more states have legalized it because they usually start with medical programs. So as I mentioned earlier, and I was a medical patient in Illinois before it became recreational. And you get a card and you go in and it's really for medical needs. It's to help with sleep. It's a lot of like chemo patients to help with pain, a lot of Parkinson's, a lot of different things, right? That people use cannabis for. Anxiety. I mean, we could go on and on and on. And that was really the derivative of the medical program. So that's those dispensaries, and that side of the cannabis industry exists in about half of the US. What's happened in the past 2 to 3 years is sort of unknowingly in 2018, Congress legalized hemp. Hemp and cannabis are effectively the same plant. The hemp plant has more CBD. The cannabis plant has more THC, but they're like sisters. They share DNA. So if you remember back in 2018 through 2020, CBD was in everything. It was in every food. It was in every beauty product. It was everywhere. That's because the 2018 Farm Bill legalized hemp as another crop for farmers in the US. And what the regulators didn't understand, what Congress and government didn't understand when they did it, is you can extract THC from hemp also. So the first wave of the hemp plant boom was all CBD. And it's non-psychoactive and it showed up everywhere. Then prices started to fall because the problem with CBD for consumers is you don't feel anything. And they were like, well, why am I paying all this money to have CBD in something? Does it really work? And you asked earlier about wellness. Our wellness culture has gotten smarter over the years, where now people want something that's effective, right? So if I'm going to spend $8 on a drink that has CBD in it, I want to know it's doing something for me, right? And I think the hard part about the early CBD boom, like 7 years ago, was there was no real effect with CBD, right? And people were paying a lot. So the CBD started to go like this, but the farmers had already planted a whole lot of hemp crops and you could extract THC from it. So what started to happen was actual psychoactive THC and cannabis became legal through the hemp side of the plant. More expensive to extract because there's less of it, but lots and lots of products. And the first wave of that was Delta 8. If some of your listeners have heard of Delta 8, it was synthetically, I'm getting specific, but hopefully this is interesting. It was synthetically derived THC. So you can convert CBD into THC by using a chemical conversion process. And so most of the original Delta 8 and stuff on the market years ago that wasn't in dispensaries was converted. There was a lot of concerns around safety because of this chemical conversion process. What it evolved to in 2022 and 2023, the past 2 to 3 years, and this was largely on the back of legislation that happened in Minnesota, is the Minnesota legislature said, well, actually, if this is in like a drink or a gummy and it's under 10 milligrams, you can sell it in liquor stores, bars, restaurants, the THC. But it has to be naturally derived from the hemp plant, not synthetically derived in most states. So what started to happen was companies got more sophisticated and said, I can get the THC from the hemp plant and I can sell it at a Binny's in Chicago, a Total Wine. And since mid 2022, so we're coming up on 3 years when Minnesota passed their legislation, it's been almost maybe 3 years exactly, products just exploded because everyone went, wait a minute, you don't have to go to a dispensary to buy this anymore. I can go into my local liquor store. I can buy it online. There are no restrictions around it. Now, like everything else, there's still bad actors. You need to be, and I'll tell you what we do at Happi to keep our consumers safe because there's much less regulation, Emily, than we would like. We would like the government and the states to enforce testing on every single product that's put on shelves, you know, making sure we came out of the dispensary market. So Happi first launched in Michigan in the dispensary market, and we realized that the consumer wasn't there. She didn't want to go into a dispensary no matter what, because it's not a comfortable shopping environment necessarily. And so we shifted when this hemp piece came up to where the THC came from. But all the safety practices are still in place with Happi. So there's a QR code on every can that takes you to like our batches. We run certificates of analysis with an independent lab. We test for all the metals. We test for potency to make sure it's within the range. If we're telling you it's 5 milligrams, it's going to be 5 milligrams. And that is really important to us. I think the tricky part about where this hemp part of the category has exploded over the past 2 years, there's a lot of companies that are just cutting corners because they don't have to. But as the alcohol industry comes into hemp, and that's what's happened because they're looking at the category going, wow, there's a lot of beverages on the market. The big alcohol players are requiring, if you're going to work with a distributor and go into these stores, they're requiring better testing, better tracking and tracing, like all of that. So it's a little wild, wild west, and you need to pick and choose your brands and make sure, you know, you're looking at how do they test their products. Like if you go to their website, like they'll often say that. The Farm Bill is up for renewal. It was up for renewal 2 years ago, and it keeps getting pushed. It's up again this September. There will be some level of federal oversight, but in both sides of the industry, the dispensary side, which tends to be much higher dose, and the hemp side, which you can get, again, in liquor stores and other channels, you know, there needs to be more sort of clear regulation across both, and the states are working on that right now. It's very specific and nuanced.
It's so interesting. Thank you for that deep dive. I just learned so much that I didn't know. And I love when I go to your website, I mean, you have a tab at the top of your website that says learn. And I love the information that you share there and what you just walked us through. I mean, this is a tangent, but when I work with clients, we always talk about the more innovative you are, the more education that you have to do to really explain to people what is happening here, how you're different, why regulation matters, like what actually goes into the process, what are these plants, how does it go from plant to being in a can, you know, being a beverage. There's so much there. And again, a lot of this, like we just accept with other stuff that we consume that we don't really question, but this is new. And I do think consumers are a lot more careful and they want these details more than they have before, especially when we're talking about this in relation to the wellness space and in relation to women. Like women care. We care now more than ever about what we're putting in our bodies. So I appreciate all the transparency on that.
Yeah, and what I will tell you is one of my biggest frustrations just being a female entrepreneur in this category is, first of all, I'm almost entirely alone. And second of all, I don't like a lot of what's happening in the category because I feel like it's a lot of beer bros now turned weed bros that are just putting high sugar and high THC in cans because they can and they think they can make money. And so I think the industry, I think it's all going to settle down and it'll get regulated, but it's not everybody in the category right now, Emily, that's got this safety, health, and wellness minded sort of approach because there's still a lot of money to be made. And I find when there's surprise, surprise, right? There's a lot of industries that are like this, but when there's a lot of money to be made, that's when things can go off the rails without sensible regulation. And so at Happi, we've largely kept our business direct to consumer for a reason, because we know we can talk directly to our consumers in that way. We know she will pay more for convenience. We know we can educate her on our website and control the information that she gets. So she's not in a store being like, wait a minute, what's this? And what's that? Like totally overwhelmed and confused. And that's where we've seen the most growth in our business, which doesn't surprise me.
You referenced there being almost alone as a woman. Is this an incredibly male dominated space?
Incredibly. And it's disappointing to me. It's very funny. I posted this on LinkedIn, I don't know, maybe a month ago. I came into cannabis in 2018. And in 2015 or 16, there was a headline in Newsweek that said, "Women in weed. This is poised to be the first billion-dollar industry where women lead and outpace men." And I'll tell you what, 7, 8 years later, it's the complete inverse. I mean, I had just to talk about women in this category. I started in 2020, women's group. We called it WINC, Women, WINC, Women in Cannabis. And we had about 25 members. They were all very senior at these cannabis companies, across the board, CFOs, head of human resources. I was a CMO at the time. And we disbanded it last year because there weren't enough women left in the category. And that's 4 years later. And it's very, very difficult because, first of all, most of the capital that's coming in is private capital. And so it tends to live within male networks of investors and others. And the second piece is a lot of the low-hanging fruit consumer in cannabis that's still there now, that's buying in dispensaries, are men. They're much more comfortable smoking a joint out in public. And I think that hangover has brought a lot more men into the industry in the category. It's the money piece and it's the sort of legacy. Stoner is a male consumer, right? And those two pieces have made the bulk of the new businesses in the cannabis space owned and operated by men.
This feels like such a white space, such room for opportunity. And of course, it comes down to money and perception. I feel like that is what holds women back in business in so many ways. And we know, I don't have the stats in front of me, I've looked them up before, like how much less capital funding investment goes into women-owned businesses, women-owned brands. I also know there are people who listen to this podcast who are investors. So
Call me.
let's connect.
Yes, for sure.
Let's connect the dots here to make that happen. And the stigma too, like, having that piece. Like, have you ever felt when you, maybe even earlier when you started this and we go to these parties, we go to networking events and you get that question, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are women comfortable saying, I own a cannabis company? To me, that sounds like I had you on the show because I think this is fascinating and so incredibly cool. But maybe there are women out there who aren't so comfortable kind of owning that as a professional identity.
It's a great question. And I think it's mixed. And I think it depends on, in many ways, it depends on how much of a risk taker and sort of the tip of the spear women feel comfortable being, right? And so I think there was, like, again, a really big groundswell under cannabis, 4 or 5 years ago when a lot of states were legalizing and it thought maybe it'll get legalized at the federal level. And there was a lot of excitement behind it. And now I think realizing it's going to take a lot longer at the federal level because, again, politicians are like consumers. They're still stuck in the old stigma too. I was just reading recently how far ahead the industry is of the government. The industry on both sides, the hemp and I mean, it's operating and making billions of dollars. But the federal government in particular and many states are still like, no, 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 cannabis is a drug and it shouldn't be allowed. But we're going to allow alcohol, which is also a drug and actually has a lot more proven research behind it about how bad it is for you, right? So it's this incredible sort of scenario. And I think that we have heard from consumers over and over again, the one thing that keeps the stigma top of mind for them, and I'd imagine this is the case for female entrepreneurs too, is the fact that it's federally illegal. It's amazing. I love women and I love this conversation. Like, women are rule followers and men tend to be less so. And so that is part of why this stigma has persisted so much more with women and why women entrepreneurs are afraid to take risks in this category, I believe, because they're rule followers. And at the end of the day, if this is still federally illegal, even if it's legal in Illinois and it's legal in New York and it's legal in California, if it's still illegal at the federal level, they feel like they're doing something wrong. And that's going to take a long time to change. And I think women disproportionately take that on, that like, I don't want to break the rules. I don't want to do the wrong thing. Whereas men are like, screw it. I just want to get high, you know? So I've seen that for the past 7 years over and over again. And I think it has a big impact on the businesses being built in this category.
We are rule followers. And honestly, that's a huge reason why I have this podcast, right? When we use the word rule, like, yes, in this case, it is intimidating to hear that something is federally illegal and I'm going to like strap my career to that industry. So that is real for sure. But there's a million rules that aren't even real rules that we just have been conditioned to believe, and we structure our lives around that and we behave within them, whether we always realize it or not. So yeah, it's another fascinating angle to this industry and to the work that you're doing. Not that everybody listening needs to become a cannabis consumer or certainly not a cannabis founder, but like, let's use this conversation as a catalyst to do the stuff we're always talking about here, which is finding what works for you, finding fulfillment on your terms, finding relaxation on your terms, going into an industry that's interesting to you. Like, we can do this. Men are doing this. Not to make it about comparison, but they do it all the time.
Do it all the time. And I will tell you, as a case study of one, and I know you mentioned it at the top of the episode, but like, I literally had like a turn 40 kind of quasi like midlife crisis. I was like, okay, I've done everything by the book. I'm a firstborn. I got great grades in high school. I went to a really good college. I went and launched my career in New York. Like, I literally did the like white picket fence playbook. And I turned around at 40 and was like, I'm burnt out and miserable and sick all the time. And this is traveling constantly for work. And this is not the life I envisioned for myself growing up that I thought when I made all these decisions. So I did like a 180. I was like, okay, I'm going to quit corporate world and go into cannabis, which my family was really supportive of. I mean, my mom to this day is an investor in Happi and is wildly supportive of my choices. But it was hard. Kimberly Clark, I was in Neenah, Wisconsin, and they were like, you're going to do what? You're going to give up this comfortable salary and all this. And I was like, I'm really passionate about this, guys. You know, like, I want to do something. And then in 2020, after having been in cannabis for several years, I lived in Chicago and I moved my family to Nicaragua because we left during the pandemic for about 3 months to have a very different experience. And we ended up loving living by the beach and having this wildly different experience. And so I went from being like the Ivy League graduate who had a corporate CPG career until she turned 40 to being like, okay, now I run a cannabis company and live in a Central American country, like halfway off the grid, right? And yeah, was it seen as nuts? But I'll tell you something, like, I'm definitely happier than I was before I made these choices. And when I say happier, I feel like I'm making decisions that are for me and I'm working on things like Happi that are very passionate to me, because I remember how much pressure I was under, and I'm still under pressure, right? But at least I'm under pressure that like I feel is in alignment with who I want to be and the person I want to become, and not this sort of trappings of like, oh, you've got to do this to get to this, and you got to do this to get to this, right? You got to go to the best college, and then you got to go to the greatest grad school, and then you got to, there are other ways and other paths. And that's part of what I hope to do with Happi, is not only tell women you don't have to drink alcohol to relax, or you don't have to take pills to sleep, but it's also to like model that it's okay to be different. And I know, Emily, that's the whole purpose of this podcast. So like, that's why I'm so aligned and so thrilled to be here, because I believe in it to my core.
I'm so happy for you in the life that you're in now, and celebrating you for making change, because it is a reckoning for anybody who comes to a place where you feel like, I did everything I was supposed to, or, I did everything that I expected to bring me a happy result of just feeling good in my life, and it didn't work. Now what? Like, now what do we do differently? And a lot of people don't make that change for a variety of reasons, and they just kind of keep going through. So celebrating you for shifting your life, for making the move professionally, geographically, and doing what's right for you. It's very aspirational. And I think we need stories like this in the world to encourage us that looking inward and doing what's right for us, there is such a beauty on the other side of that.
Totally. And I say the same right back to you. Like, the whole idea behind this podcast, I just love, because you're making the choices. They're brave. And that's the other word I would use to describe. You have to have a little bit of bravery to do this, but it's so worth it, right? The choices you've made and what you've prioritized in your life, it may not be for everybody, but it works for you, and it's a brave choice. And to share that story and to have a podcast where women who are making alternative choices, I think is brilliant, because it allows us to get off of this roller coaster that I think so many women want to get off of. And when I first went into cannabis, the number one thing people said to me was like, how much do I have to take to sleep at night? Like, all my friends were like, wait a minute, you got off of sleeping meds, like you're not drinking a glass of wine before bed, et cetera. Like, what do I do? Right. And there was like a desperation in their voice, like, tell me, help me. And I just feel like so many women feel trapped, right? Like, in this life that maybe they didn't want for themselves. And it's never too late, right? I know that's such a cliche thing to say, but you can always make a change. And so I thank you for modeling that as well, because I think it's really important.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. Okay, Lisa, before we close, what have I not asked you that you would like to share with our listeners about you, about Happi, about the cannabis industry? What else is important for us to say?
Two things. People say, where should I start? And what I like to say is, start low and go slow, because that's the way, if you're not used to THC or you've never had a THC beverage, you just want to try it first. And I would also say, try it at home. Most of our consumers, actually prefer to drink Happi at home, because it's usually a small group setting or with, a significant other, or alone. I drink Happi alone a lot. And I think that we have a 2.5 milligram and a 5. So definitely start there, see how it affects you. And then I would just say, stay curious, right? I'm someone who is not necessarily inherent risk taker as a human. I'm very spent most of my life on a straight and narrow path, but in moving to Nicaragua and in starting Happi, I also took up surfing, for example. And I just want to share this one thing because it's very relevant. So tomorrow, May 30th, we're recording this on the 29th, is Nicaraguan Mother's Day. And they are closing the biggest surf break down here to allow only women surfers to surf for 2 hours. They have security. They're not letting any men get in the water. And I'm like, giddy. First of all, I don't think it would ever happen in California or Florida or in the US, but I'm also really giddy because I'm just like, it brings me such joy and such hope to see women come together like that. And I think it's a hard time for a lot of people right now. And I think there's a lot of beauty in the world. And so I just share that anecdote because I took up surfing at the ripe old age of, 42 a few years ago. And I've never, ever surfed with only women in the water. And so that's just sort of a gift and I'm looking forward to it.
That sounds epic. That is going to be amazing. Just the visual of that, an ocean of women. That is so cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to have my husband sit up there and grab a lot of pictures of it. So it'll be fun.
Oh, definitely. Okay, Lisa has offered an extremely generous code to everybody listening. So if you go to the Happi website, and again, it's spelled HAPPI, and use the code CuriousLife25, number 25, and we'll put this in the show notes, you will get 25% off your purchase. And that's site-wide. Yes, Lisa?
Site-wide, it will work for anything. First-time purchase only, but I encourage you to try any new products. And again, it's Happi with an I, HAPPI. So happyhourdrink.com is the URL. I will make sure Emily has my own, personal email. You guys can write me and ask questions. I love talking to our consumers. It's what gets me up every day. So
Thank you for that generous gift. And thank you for the gift of your time. I love your energy. I'm so impressed by what you're doing. And it's just an incredibly interesting industry. And I also love Happi. So thank you so much for sharing all of this with us.
and thank you for having me. This was such a joy. I really loved it. I love the mission behind your podcast. I love that you have so many incredible women listening to you. And thank you for having me. It's been really fun.
Thank you for listening. Now I want to hear what you learned. DM me on Instagram at Curious Life of a Child-Free Woman, or leave a review with your top takeaway. These ratings really do make a difference. If you're not a member of the Curious Life Club yet, you are invited. Visit CuriousLifeOfAChildFreeWoman.com to join the conversation, share suggestions, and be first to know the next curious topic. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next week.